So now that we've covered the registration, login, and log out part of our app, it's time to take a moment and just review the code that we've written and see if there's ways that we can improve it. And one of the most obvious things is just the sheer amount of strings that we're starting to build up in our app. And remember that strings are kind of dangerous because when we type a string, we basically get rid of any sort of help that Xcode gives us in terms of code checking. So whereas when we write a method such as perform segue, if I made a typo in that method name, then I'm going to be called to attention on that because I'm going to get an error which tells me, oh, it doesn't know about this perform f segue. And if I look at that closely, as long as I'm sort of vaguely with it, then I'll know, okay, I made a typo here, and once I fix it, my error's gone and my syntax highlighting comes back on. But strings are different because when we create a string, we're essentially saying, yes, computer, I know what's going on. I know that it has to be spelled this way. And we get no help from Xcode. So it's really easy to mess up and accidentally make a typo, or say you, instead of having an uppercase R, you have a lowercase r, and this string identifier for our segue no longer matches the one that we created up here. And when that happens, then what our app is going to do is it's going to crash. It's not going to be able to find a segue with that particular misspelt identifier that we had here. So let's register another user, a@b.com, and 123456 as their password. Click register, and our app now crashes. And the reason? Well, it says that terminating app because there is no segue with identifier register to chat. So how can we make our lives a little bit easier? And more importantly, how can we make our future lives or our colleagues' lives easier? Well, we can reduce the number of times that we type strings in our app. So for example, once we set up a string, we want to make sure that we always access it using code rather than just typing it out like so. And to do this, we're going to create something called a constants file. So in our FlashChat iOS 13 folder, we're going to create a new file, and this is going to be a simple Swift file, and it's going to be called constants.swift. So let's go ahead and click create. And we don't actually need any imports. All we need is just to create a brand new structure called constants. And inside this structure, we're going to create some properties. So the first one that I might want to create is called the register segue. And I'm going to set this to equal the string for the name of this segue. So I'm just going to copy and paste it from here into our constants file. And then I'm going to do the same for my login segue, which is this one down here. And this one's called login to chat, spelled like this. So let's paste that in here as a string as well. And now there's one extra thing I can add to these lines of code to make my life a little bit easier. I'm going to add a keyword called static in front of the word let. And what this does is it turns these properties from what we would call an instance property, so a property that's tied to an instance or an object created from the constant struct. But now, once it has the static keyword in front of it, it means that this has now become a type property. So it's a property that's associated with the constant data type. So what this means is that inside my register view controller, instead of using this string, I can simply write constants dot register segue. And you'll notice that here I'm not actually creating a new object from constants, in which case I would be adding my parentheses here, right? So instead, I'm actually accessing the type, which is constant, and then I'm getting hold of that register segue's value. So let's take a look at what's actually happening behind the scene. So in my structure, I'm going to create what's called an instance property, and I'm going to set this to equal just ABC. And then I'm going to create a static let, and this is called a type property. And this is going to be set to equal 123. So now when I want to use the value of instance property, say I wanted to print it, then what I actually have to do in this case, in order to get ABC printed, I actually have to create a new object from my structure. So I might call it my structure equals my structure, and then add the parentheses at the end to notify that I'm initializing a new structure from this blueprint. And now my structure is a new instance from this struct. So this particular instance has access to the instance property ABC. So I can now print my structure dot instance property. Now, on the other hand, if I wanted to use my type property, then I don't actually have to create a new instance of my structure at all. I can simply just tap into the type, which is my structure, and then write dot type property. And I can already go ahead and print this into the console. So let's go ahead and run this part first, and you should see ABC, and then let's run this part, and you'll see 1, 2, 3. So the type property is associated with the type, and the instance properties are associated with instances that are created from the type. So small differentiation, but big effects. I have a little bit of background reading for you as a reading assignment. If you head over to this link, which I'll add to the course resources page, and you go to this button on this page and select type properties, I want you to have a read a bit more about the background of how type properties work, what they're like, and a little bit more detail on it. And at the same time, if you take a look at type methods, then you'll notice that it's very similar to what we saw with type properties. So if you create a method, let's call it instance method inside our structure, versus if you create the static func, which is now a type method inside our structure, then you can activate or call those two methods in the same way that we've done with our properties. So that instance method, the one which just has the func keyword, requires an instance. So this my structure that I created on line 16. And then I can use the dot notation and call that instance method. But with my type methods, all I need is to access the my structure type and then use the dot notation, and I can access and call the type method already without having to initialize an object from that structure. And you can do the same thing for classes as well. It's not something unique to structures. Now, by convention, you'll normally see a lot of people type, instead of constants, they'll have the name K for constant because it's cooler to spell it with a K. Not really. But it does mean that it's much shorter. So whenever you need to access each of these segues, instead of typing constant, you'll just write k.register segue or k.login segue, like here. And you'll know it comes from our constants file because of that word k. So now I want you to head over to the README file and take a look at the section called constants. And I want you to copy this section in between these 3 backticks and the closing backticks and paste it to replace what you've currently got in your constants file. And just check to make sure that the register segue and the login segue strings actually do match the ones that you've got in the main.storyboard. So the other thing I'm going to add is the name of our app as well. So I'm going to copy this string from my chat view controller and also add it to my constants right at the top. So it's going to be static let, and it's going to be called app name, and then I'm going to put it in here. So now when we go to our welcome view controller, instead of having flash chat, we'll have k.appname, And similarly in our chat view controller, the title is going to be k.appname. And now not only are we making our code a lot safer by keeping everything all the same and all constant, we're also reducing the amount of code that we're having to write, and we can get Xcode to auto-suggest and hit tab or enter to insert it instead. So now all that's left is to run your app and test out all the things that we've changed just now, say going from the login screen to the chat screen, going from the register screen to the chat screen, and also that the app name and the animations are actually displaying correctly, just to make sure that you've actually got your segues named exactly the same as the one that we've just pasted into the constants file. And once you've done that and once you're happy with it, then head over to the next lesson where we're going to get started building out a table view and populating this page with some messages. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there.